everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jeanette Baum. I am Director of Partnerships at Inquire Ed.
And I'm Martin Andrews. I am the Director of Communications, and welcome to today's webinar, Inspiring Examples of Informed Action. We are so glad to have you all here as you continue to join, and I see some familiar names in the participant list and some new people. We're so glad to have you here. Today's webinar, if during the course of the webinar you have questions or comments, we're going to use the chat feature for that. And I'm actually going to hop into the chat here in a little while, so I'll be there with you. If we don't get to your questions right away, we will come back to them at the end. And also, sometimes our participants will talk about resources or websites. Don't worry about copying all that down, because tomorrow or the next day, you'll receive a follow-up email. And in that email, there'll be a link to a blog post. And that blog post is going to summarize the webinar, share any resources that we talked about, and provide a recording of the webinar. So don't worry about that. We'll take care of all those details for you. And
great. So this webinar is part of a series, and we like to highlight the upcoming webinars in case you this is your first Inquire Ed webinar and you aren't signed up for future webinars. So upcoming webinars, we have two coming up in the next month. One, we'll be looking at our curriculum review guide, where we'll look at 5 rubrics that we've developed to evaluate social studies curriculum. And then on May 12th, we'll be talking about curriculum-based professional learning and this idea of, can curriculum transform teaching and learning? And Martin, that webinar is with a guest, correct?
yeah, that guest is Jim Short, and he's from the Carnegie Corporation in New York, and he will be talking about their approach to curriculum-based professional learning. And then we're going to have Sarah back on, and everybody's going to meet Sarah here in a second, and she's going to talk about how that's working in our schools and districts as well.
Great. Yeah, that'll be good. So if you aren't signed up for those already, you can go to inquireed.org/webinars and sign up for those.
Yes, so the webinar series is brought to you by 2 organizations. The first is the National Council for the Social Studies. They have been around since 1921. They are the largest organizations that is advocating for the social studies in the country, and they've got some great upcoming events. And one of them is a collaboration with the National Coalition Against Censorship. And they're going to be doing a special learning webinar on the 19th at 4 p.m. Eastern. And you can go to socialstudies.org/professional learning to find out more. And we are collaborating with NCSS again for this summer's Elementary Inquiry Institute. If you want to join educators, administrators, instructional leaders from all over the country who are passionate about inquiry and the social studies, then the Elementary Inquiry Institute is for you. You can find out more about that at inquireed.org/summer inquiry. It's virtual this year. Hopefully in 2022, we'll have everyone coming to Chicago, but this year it is virtual, so you can sign up for that and learn more about the sample sessions and the goals and objectives of the Elementary Summer Institute.
Great. The webinar is also brought to you by Inquire Ed. So Inquire Ed and NCSS have co-sponsored this webinar, and here at Inquire Ed, we offer an elementary social studies curriculum called Inquiry Journeys. And our curriculum really supports culturally responsive instruction, inspires inquiry-based teaching and learning. It's aligned to national social studies standards and ELA standards, and it connects to high quality and diverse sources. So if you haven't heard about Inquiry Journeys yet or want to learn more, be sure to reach out.
And now we want to find out a little bit about you. So you know who's sponsoring this webinar, and now we want to find out what your role is in the educational landscape. What brings you here today? So I'm going to launch a poll here, and unfortunately, Zoom only gives me 10 options, And I know I didn't include all the roles here. So if I didn't include you on this poll, I apologize, but why don't you put it in the chat for us? So are you an elementary teacher, a middle school teacher, high school instructional coach, district administrator, librarian, principal? Are you from higher ed? Are you a curriculum writer from an ed organization? Or do you have multiple hats that you wear? So select those. And as soon as we've got about 80% of you that have voted, we will share those results with you. And it looks like instructional coaches are leading us. Gifted, talented specialist, museum educator. Wonderful. Those are shared in the chat. I will end this poll and share the results with everyone. We've got instructional coaches, 22% of you out there, middle school teachers and elementary teachers. So whatever your role is, I really hope that you get something out of today's webinar. And right now, I am going to turn everything over to Jeanette, and I'm going to hop into the chat and answer any questions you have in there. So Jeanette, I'm going to turn it all over to you.
Thanks, Martin. So we're really excited about this webinar today, and we hope to do many more of these. The idea of this webinar really is to spotlight teachers and the amazing things that are happening in classrooms. And this year, that's many things that are happening virtually. And really a big piece of inquiry in social studies and in our curriculum is this idea of informed action. And there's a lot of ways that can look. Sarah's going to talk about that. But we really feel that to move things forward, to inspire, to get people moving in the direction of inquiry and social studies, it's really important that we see what's happening in classrooms, that we see the amazing work that teachers are doing with their students, and that we see the amazing work that the students are doing as they're using inquiry and social studies. So that's why we're here today. And we know it's been a hard year, and we know that teachers have had to think really creatively and think outside the box to bring informed action to their students. And so we just want to take some time today to celebrate that. So we have 3 teachers here today that are going to be sharing informed action examples from this year. And also Sarah will be joining us. And Sarah, I'm going to actually have you join us now, if you can turn on your video. Sarah will be joining us to talk more about informed action. So before I pass it over to Sarah, I want to just give a quick overview of the inquiry process and how it looks in our curriculum. So basically in our curriculum, you'll see that there's a launch module where students are hooked into the unit, investigation modules that are building content knowledge, and then an action module where students are working on an inquiry product, we call it. This is all centered around a complex, open-ended question that's framing the learning in the unit. Throughout that whole unit, there's informed action. And so Sarah, I'd love to pass it over to you now and have you talk about informed action.
Excellent. So if you don't mind going to the next slide, I love to use it to illustrate how I think of informed action. And I think of it kind of backwards to, in some ways, the 2 components of informed action. There's being informed and there's taking action. And I sometimes think back to my days in the classroom. And when I was a teacher, I feel very proud of some of the informed action projects that my students did. But until I realized how the being informed and taking action go together, I kind of operated in one of the 2 circles you see here on this Venn diagram. We had being informed and we had taking action. When I think about being informed, my students would go through engaging units of study, and then they would share their learning in a compelling way within the classroom, maybe a presentation to their classmates, or maybe just with me. Perhaps they wrote an essay or they created something that I looked at. That sounded like that represents being informed. Taking a test, that shows what you learned, that shows the information gathered. And then there was this other piece of work I did with my students that was taking action. We did a lot of service learning, and it was really engaging and rewarding, but oftentimes it was not related to the information we were learning through our units of study. So my students, I'd say, what should our service learning project be? And they'd come up with something around recycling or carpooling or promoting something that was good for the community. But it was something they already knew about. And then when it came together for me, when I realized that the being informed and the taking action comes together for informed action, that really changed things. So Jeanette, if you can go to the next slide. This is when we see that being informed and taking action come together, that's where we get informed action. And the idea here, if you think back to the slide that Jeanette shared earlier, the entire unit of study is connected through the goal of ultimately taking action in a way that responds to the question that framed the unit at the beginning. That question structured the investigation, all the information we're gathering, all the information we're synthesizing and drawing new conclusions in order to transition to taking action at the end. And so informed action is the entire arc of the unit that culminates in taking action in a way that impacts the world around us. And so here's this great definition. Informed action is purposeful public action that students take to respond to a challenge raised by their inquiry. So there you see their inquiry is framed by the question, the challenge is framed by the question, the entire investigation centers around that, and ultimately they take action that somehow impacts beyond the classroom. It has a public component to it. And so that's how we defined informed action here at InquireEd and within our curriculum of inquiry journeys, that all of the teachers that you saw today, you'll see how this inquiry arc is alive in the action that they took. So we're going to look at just quickly some ideas of what informed action can actually look like, some quick snapshots of informed action. So informed action can look like student-generated questions. These can be the questions they generate at the very beginning of a unit or questions they generate throughout the unit, that you can keep them posted, you can return to them, they can frame some of the investigation, but informed action looks like student-generated questions. For informed action looks like sustained investigation. You can't take informed action without gathering that information. So here we see awesome pictures of students digging into the work and doing the work of the social sciences, civics, economics, history, and geography. Informed action can look like an inquiry challenge statement. This is the statement that students write in inquiry journeys units that pivot them from investigation to action. And this statement embodies or encapsulates what they're going to do, why they're going to do it, who they're going to do it for, and kind of gives a framework for their action as they move into that work. And informed action looks like informed action projects. So these are the products students make at the end of our units that take all of their learning and then do something to impact the world around them. In this case, you see that was students created board games to teach other members of their community about how our landscape is changing. And then informed action can look like unit-long displays. These are a central feature in all of our inquiry units. I like to think of unit-long displays as living, breathing bulletin boards where students work and they're learning. It's constantly going up, changing, moving, coming down. They're posting questions. They're adding pieces of their work, and it's making their learning visible as they move through the inquiry arc. So this is an important piece of informed action. So informed action is not just the product at the end, but it's the whole process along the way.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks for bearing with me as I click through the slides for you. I know that makes it a lot harder.
It was perfect.
Great, so we're actually going to bring on the teachers now, and we'll be talking with one teacher. We'll be talking with Kelly first. Kelly, do you mind turning on your video? Hi, Kelly.
Hi.
Hi. So we'll be talking with three teachers today. Kelly, you're the lucky one that gets to go first. And thank you so much for joining us and sharing your student work with us. First, I would just love to hear where you're based and what you teach. And then I'd love to hear too, with your district, if you guys have you been virtual, hybrid, or in person this year?
So I teach fifth grade at an elementary school in Appleton, Wisconsin. And within our fifth grade, I am the only teacher in our building, so I teach all subjects. And so I get the whole scope of things within the classroom. One of the things I was going to start with explaining our unit is how we have moved through quite a few different phases in Appleton. And I think to best understand what the unit looked like for myself and my students, I thought it was important to share that piece too. Is we started this year full virtual. And that's how we began the first unit that I'm going to talk about. And then we moved into a hybrid phase where half of my students would be in the classroom and half online at the same time. And we were in the hybrid model for probably the majority of the unit. And then luckily at the end, when we got to get more hands-on, then we went full in person.
That's great. And so what unit are we looking at today?
So the first unit I taught with my students is Native America. And as you see on the screen there, that our overarching question was, how can we better honor the cultural heritage of this land? And we started the unit by looking at how most of history has been told through one perspective. And we examined that our story of what we know of history might change depending on the perspective that it's told through. And so this brought us to the idea that history needs to be re-examined through multiple different perspectives so that we can fully understand that story. And we took that lens throughout the entire unit of study, and we explored multiple different diverse sources to form a deeper understanding of the cultures and the histories of our country's Native American peoples.
That's great. And then it looks like the product that your students worked on in the action module, what product did they create at the end of the unit?
And so they went through the sustained investigation of researching the cultural characteristics, cultural roles, beliefs, traditions, and everyday life of tribes from the 9 different cultural areas of North America. And we added to that learning by listening to cultural stories and looking at artifacts to build that better understanding of that true history. And then students got to pick a tribe that they were interested in learning more about and got to dig into that tribe and research more about that specific tribe. And then they took all of that learning and they built a 3D diorama, and each student's diorama represented the climate, the geography, the animal and plant life, as well as the daily life of the tribe. And so they built examples of shelter and represented the cultural roles, and also included the tools and technology that was from that tribe. And then they presented their diorama along with a Google Slides presentation to our classroom. However, we wanted to take it beyond just our classroom, even with the challenges this year of not being able to physically go outside of our classroom. But our district was new to inquiry journeys this year. And so a lot of our students in our school and a lot of our teachers hadn't taken that lens of looking at history through multiple different perspectives. And so we wanted to take action by sharing our learning with those around us and helping them better honor the cultural heritage of the land that we live in. And so we took pictures of our dioramas and students presenting and put it into a presentation with a little description. And we shared it out both with the students' parents as well as with our staff. And some of our staff members then took it a step further for us and shared that learning with their students in their classroom, since this curriculum and information was new to our entire district and students hadn't gone through this process before.
That's amazing. I love that. Finding ways to get it outside the classroom, even this year when it's challenging, when you're not even necessarily in your classroom all the time.
Absolutely.
That's great. I would love to hear some of the reflections, especially with this being new for your students to go through this type of process. What types of reflections did your students have going through the process?
There were a lot of challenges right away with full virtual and then with hybrid and trying to make it seem more like a whole class. But at the end, we did kind of just a impromptu reflection conversation, and there were three comments that really stood out to me. One was a student mentioned that she loved working with her hands and getting to build something because of over the last year, they haven't really gotten hands-on with their learning. So this was something that really drew her into school and she was so interested in it. She wanted to take it home on the weekend and work on it. Another thing that stood out to me about that inquiry process is a student mentioned that he loved the fact that he had choice and control over his own learning. And then my favorite comment is actually similar to what Sarah shared as well, is one of my students said that sometimes the journey means more than the destination. And it just really hit home for me, for students that have gone through so many challenges today, for a fifth grader to recognize that sometimes that end product and that informed action isn't everything, that learning process along the way means just as much to them. And for that student to recognize that, it just was really awesome for us.
I love that. That's really great to have those reflections. Sarah, do you have any thoughts or things to add to that?
Yeah, so Kelly, I'd like to hear for you, how has this, what would be your reflection as a teacher on your teaching, on connecting with your students, engagement, any of those pieces? Has going through this informed action process with your students kind of eliminated? And it was really great to hear the kids' reflections, but what have you kind of reflected on as a teacher?
I feel like even though we were full virtual and then hybrid, that this was, in the last 5 years, the most engaged I've seen my students. And they enjoyed learning, and they asked for could we listen to more cultural stories? Can I do the research at home on the weekend? And to see students, especially fifth graders, want to take that initiative to further their learning, it just was a really aha moment for me that this is such a rich and great curriculum that offers not just students that opportunity, but for myself too, to grow as a teacher. We all know teachers like that control, and it's sometimes hard to give up some of that control, and it's a little nerve-wracking sometimes. But I think my biggest takeaway is that my students really showed me that I can give them more independence and freedom to drive their own learning, and to let their curiosities, let them explore their curiosities and let that drive be the driving factor of their learning.
That's an incredible reflection. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kelly. Time is flying, so I'm actually going to move on to the next teacher, but thank you so much for sharing. All right, Alicia. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. I would love to kind of ask you the same questions we asked Kelly, starting with just where are you based, what do you teach, and then a little bit about how your district has been in person, virtual, hybrid this year.
Okay. Well, my name's Alicia Bowman, and I teach 5th grade for Lakota Local Schools at Westchester, Ohio. And it's interesting for us for this year. My school is face-to-face. However, they made, there was children that wanted to be virtual. So they took a grade, a class from each grade and made them a virtual class. So even though we are still part of the school, my class is completely virtual. So our challenge this year was to figure out, okay, how do I still give my students all those rich learning experiences, but in a virtual world that their peers are getting in a face-to-face environment? And so that kind of leads into our unit. We are doing the 13 colonies, and for the past 2 years, we have always done this. We did this unit, and we did a colonial museum for their final project. And we have met with Cincinnati Museum. They had representatives come out and share with the students about how to set up museums, artifacts. And we had children make their artifacts and have the community come and visit. Well, this year, unfortunately, my class couldn't do that. And they were kind of upset about it because these 5th graders were the 3rd graders that got to come to the first museum. And they remember it at our school where they all came in and saw all the museums artifacts. And so they were kind of like, well, we don't get to do the museum. And so that just kind of broke my heart. And so I was like, well, and so my colleagues, the other virtual teachers, we were saying, well, how can we still do this rich colonial museum, but in a virtual world? So we kind of just talked about it, and we decided that we could make a Google slideshow, and it worked perfect. The kids, we still, had them make their artifact about the central question about how to thrive, survive, or fail. And then they simply just posted it onto our slide, and then we can view the slideshow through that way. And it was interesting to hear some things that Kelly was saying about the freedom. And it's interesting having that perspective, because in the past 2 years that we did the project, I always made sure I wanted the kids to do it at school. So it was their project, they did it, and I was kind of watching everything. Well, this time, I met with them, but I wasn't right there with them making it. And that was kind of a little bit of me like having to give away that freedom. And I didn't know how. I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be that great. Oh my goodness. It was amazing when I stepped back and let them just go at it. The products were amazing, and the experiences they had were so much richer, and it really worked out fabulous. Plus, I didn't have to clean up the mess because they didn't do it in my classroom. So I appreciate that. So that was kind of like where we were with doing this project.
Yeah. And I, because it was a slideshow, I did pull in a couple of slides. And I would love to hear, I know you shared one of your students' reflections, and maybe just in general, kind of how your students reflected on doing this unit and doing this type of, creating this type of product. But I'll show these slides. And I feel like this is great too, because it shows all the writing that's kind of involved in this too.
They not only had to make the project, they also had to just give a description of how it answered the essential question. But it was interesting because sometimes I feel like they have to go out and just like, they were like, well, do I have to go to the store and buy all this material? And what am I going to do? And I'm like, no, you use what you have at their house. And they were like, oh, okay. And so when we talked about that, they started to become more aware of like what was around. And I said, get some things that you have at your house. You've got a paper towel roll, you've got aluminum foil, go at it. And this young lady, she did a wonderful job of making those tools with the supplies she had at her house, and was able to label it and make that rich experience for her.
And then we have this one, which is very different. We could show the whole slideshow, and it was interesting, the different approaches in both the product that they created, but then also even the design of the slide. Everyone approached it a different way.
And so this one was interesting. This one, she decided to have her grandfather help her with the construction of a table. And at first I was like, oh, well, I don't want your grandpa to do it. I want you to do it. But she did. It was amazing through the write-up, her journey, and she shared her journey with us, that it wasn't just her grandpa making the table and she got to present it. You can see through her pictures and through her reflections that it was a process, and that she enjoyed that time with her grandfather, and she actually learned how to make a table with wood shop, and all those math skills, and just that community of relationships with her grandfather of making this. And he even kind of helped share with her, one of her reflections was like, because it's about the colonies, about how this was a little bit harder than I thought. And he was like, well, yeah, that's why it was so valuable for them. And so it was just like, really, that community involvement happened through this, which was really exciting, Rich, which I don't think I wouldn't have done that if it was face to face, because I would have been in so control of making sure it was in the classroom. So this was really exciting to see not only her learning about the unit, but building that relationship with her grandfather, community, and just learning that other skill of the wood shop tools. So it is kind of nice to see that they could use any kind of material, and they just, like I said, once you give up that freedom, it's a little scary, but they will amaze you with what they designed for you. So I was excited that the museum got to live again this year through a virtual world with the help of Google Slide.
Yeah.
I love what you talked about here about the students learning, creating this authentic connection to their real lives, their real lived experiences, the real people around them, and being able to pull those connections into their learning. I think it's so inspiring. And I'm curious how, if you've thought about ways that it feels like this was like this really lucky aha that happened through this virtual experience. But if you've thought of any ways that you might, should you ever be back into a personal classroom, or if you have a lot of teachers teaching either hybrid or in person right now, if you have some thoughts about how they might bring that connection in, because it clearly was so powerful for your students.
I think what I would do is I would open it up. Before I was so rigid, and I said, you have to do it here at school. Like you have, because I wanted to make sure like they did it, but open it up, giving the freedom for that. I also like that to open it up. I would like the Nearpod to maybe put it in a Nearpod, for example, for them, so they can have that more of a rich, where we can have more of, we had the Google slideshow to present to everyone, but I think the Nearpod would give an example where people can give that feedback that maybe that I just didn't think about, having that feedback that they got when there was a face-to-face. But I think the Nearpod aspect where people can write their comments and feedback to them, and the kids can go back and look at that, would be a rich experience for them.
Great tips. I also just want to say that I love the way you realize that the kids will rise. There is no bar, that they just when we open it up, they just keep rising. So that's an exciting thing to see come from your students.
And Alicia, this was your second or third time to do this unit, is that right?
Yes, this is my third time doing the museum. The first year we did it full-fledged. We did the whole museum. The kids had the presentation. People were able to come in. Last year, we were making the projects. We had it all ready to present, and then we got shut down because of everything. And so it was sad because the kids were ready to present and they didn't get to. And so, and then this year we did it virtually. So I'm just so happy that it was interesting. I didn't realize how powerful it was for these kids that they saw it in third grade. Because we thought, oh, we'll just invite the other grades. Okay, so they can have some people to come in. But they remembered it, and they were like, well, yeah, we want to do the museum too. I was like, oh, okay. And so it was very interesting that the powerful that they enjoy seeing the other artifacts and going to the museums for
Yeah, it's almost like a ripple effect that can happen as students are experiencing inquiry as almost like observers or participators, and then they get to be part of creating those products. That's really, really cool to think about. Thank you so much, Alicia, for sharing.
you.
We're also joined by Bob. Are you there, Bob?
Here.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going all right.
Great. So yeah, would love to talk about your unit here. But first, I'd love to hear about what do you teach and where do you teach, and a little bit about if your school was virtual or in person or hybrid this year.
So I teach at Detroit Premier Academy, which is like an inner city school in Detroit. I teach 4th and 5th grade social studies and science. We our year has been very challenging because Michigan has been one of the states that has been like across the board very, with the COVID rates, we will be very high, then we'll get it under control, then go back high, and then get it under control. So it's been a roller coaster with us. And we started all virtual, and then slowly went back to hybrid. But our hybrid model was half the kids come like Monday, Tuesday, and then the other half come Thursday, Friday. Everybody is virtual or asynchronous on Wednesday. And then we also gave the families the option to be completely virtual. So I had classes that were completely virtual, classes that were in person 2 days, and then virtual the other 3 days. And then just as we started to get the hang of that schedule, we had to shut everything back down around like Thanksgiving or just after Thanksgiving. And then we went all virtual basically until almost March, when we just really went back to 5 days a week in person learning.
Okay, wow.
So it has been, and our school, like, luckily there are schools in Michigan around us that have, stuck through the 5 days a week, but our principal is really cares and like doesn't want to put anybody in any danger. So we've been very sensitive to everything, but it has also affected learning. It has affected the students' rhythms and getting into the swing of things, and then all of a sudden changing. So yeah, it has been a incredible challenge this year.
Yeah, and this was your first year using Inquiry Journeys?
This is our first year, yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So yeah, I would love to hear. I think today we're talking about the Native America unit, and I would love to, or talk about any unit. You did. I think you've done 2 or 3, right?
Yeah, we've done it. I mean, I've done it with 4th and 5th grade. The inquiry question is from the 13 colonies, I believe.
Oh.
That you have.
You are right.
And that's kind of what we're on. So if that's okay, I would like to talk about that.
Yeah, that was an error on our part on this slide. So yeah, 13 colonies. We would love to hear about that unit.
So yeah, we've one of the big things with the students is this is almost like one of the first years where we're actually studying history. In 4th grade, we talk a lot about geography and resources. But they're really starting to talk about history and the history of the indigenous people we started with, and then we moved into the migration into the so-called New World. And the big thing with students was like, why are we studying history? Why are we doing this? And we try to talk about that. Things change, historical events change, technology changes, but humans are creatures of habit. And so when we study history, we are also studying mistakes people made in the past or challenges that people made in the past, and then trying to relate it to things that we have, challenges that we're experiencing today. And that's basically what this unit was about, trying to look at the history and then just relate it to things that the kids are doing. And that really started to click with them. They're like, oh, people back then were, and are the same exact way now, except we have cell phones and we all know about it instantly. And so I would say that one of the favorite lessons that they did was and this was in I think the version 1.0 of the 13 colonies, and it was the thought experiment of the like the absolute monarch. It was the reasons to leave. Why did people leave Europe to travel to this so-called New World? And that really resonated with a lot of my students because in Detroit, there's a lot of poverty. The kids move a lot. They move from place to place, from school to school. And a lot of times they don't understand like why. Like they're like, why are we moving here? Why are we moving to a new school? And that thought experiment of the absolute monarch of why would people leave what they know to go to something unknown? And it was because their situation was just untenable. It was just too difficult. They faced it was unfair, basically. And that was the one where it really connected with the students of like, oh yeah, people were still kind of, unfair, even more so back in the past. And then we got to talk about the parallels with the unfairness in this thought experiment with what is going on today, like with the Black Lives Matter movement, with like all the violence, and it really connected with the students to get them really engaged in the lesson.
Yeah, and the connection to history, it sounds like they definitely were making a lot of really strong connections to current events, and then also their own lived experiences.
Yeah. One of my one of the most heartbreaking and powerful things that a student said was I put forth a question of like how would this relate. I think it was after that we were talking about the reasons to migrate or to pick up and leave. How does that relate in any way to your own life? And one student wrote this essay, and he talked about how one time they came home from school and their parent was like, we're moving, they just got home from school and they're like, we're moving right now. And the student never understood, was angry, was sad, they had to pick up and leave. And then they were like, now I understand that our situation may have been unfair. And it really got them to connect with like what happened in their life. And it was great to see that, to see how they're like connecting the history to the present day, to what is going on in their lives, because it is a challenge with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's one of the things that we know about social studies and history is that it can feel very disconnected from our reality, or as teachers, we can open it up and allow students the opportunity to draw connections to their own lived experiences, and how that engages students and makes the learning meaningful, and it propels them through not just the learning of the social studies content or the state standards, but gives that learning purpose and drives them toward taking action that is also equally purposeful. And so just hearing you talk about this, it's very encouraging to hear how you made space for that and allowed students to enter that work where they were comfortable, make the connections that they were able to make. And I'm sure there are probably other students who are making the connections, in their head, but weren't open to sharing. And, some were probably learning from classmates because they weren't making that personal connection. But that ability to honor students' lived experiences and make space for it in the classroom is really powerful.
Yeah. We have to, we'll be wrapping up in a few minutes here, and I want to make sure to bring on all the teachers again to share one tip. But Bob, before we leave this slide, can you talk a little bit just about the inquiry product that your students did at the end of this unit?
Yeah, I kind of had to, because of the different schedule changes, and we kind of had to like scale back social studies to like 2 live or virtual live lessons a week, and then the rest like asynchronous work or independent work. So I kind of had to kind of make up my own type of thing, and so I used a lot of the stuff instead of like I really wanted them to make a comic, but there were technological barriers and kids having problems, and instead of having the same like 5 kids turn it in and the rest be like, I can't, take a screenshot or this is hard. I tried to relate it to things that they're doing today, or seeing today, which is like making internet memes. Yeah. So I used one of the old kind of most famous political cartoons, and I kind of like scrubbed out the text. And I was like, look at this. We talked about political cartoons, how it was a way that the way that like newspapers first poked fun at like authority, or just like got people to laugh, and I challenged them to caption it on their own with something that related to what they were going through today and what they were going through in general with school or with home life or whatever. And the one that we have that was like one of my favorites, which is the year 2020 and COVID, just carving up there. And I was just like, I was blown away by like all of them, but this one, was just like really like got me, like, made me laugh.
Yeah, that's great. I love using memes. We've seen that a few other times, right, Sarah? I feel like it's a really good inquiry product that students just kind of run with.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, let's bring on Alicia and Kelly. Are you still there?
Yes.
Yes.
We don't have time for Q&A today, and so we would love, feedback on the format of this webinar from the panelists, you wonderful panelists, but then also from anyone in attendance to think about the best way to share out all this amazing work. We don't have time for Q&A, but that's something that we would love to play with in the future. But today we did want to take a few minutes just to hear from each of you any final words of advice. So, assuming there's people on this call that are thinking of doing informed action, maybe they've never used it in social studies before, or maybe they're just starting to use more inquiry and social studies. What advice would you have for them?
I'll go. I have 2. I have a practical one and then like an aha one. My practical one was we used a checklist, like a plan sheet where the kids kind of planned it out. It wasn't just like, okay, here, go make your project. They had to have their steps and kind of a reflection about what they were going to do. And this was a really great, even being virtual, is that we could have we inbox, we kind of Zoomed, just to have that time to talk about it with them. I think that helped because it wasn't just here, just go do the project. It was a chance where they had freedom, but I could still they could talk it out with us to kind of plan that. And then the aha tip would be just try it. If you're worried and scared like me, I know a lot of teachers were very like type A, we have to have very control over it. And like, well, I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know, it's going to fail. And this one, I didn't know either. And you just got to just be gutsy and just try it. And then you're like, wow. So those are my tips, is have check-ins with the kids and then just try it.
That's awesome. Thanks.
I'll go next if that's okay. One of the things that I really liked about the Inquire Ed is the way that it's laid out. But one of the challenges I also had at the beginning, since this is like the first time I've done it, is adhering to like the time constraints that you put with each part, and with like either behavioral issues with in-person kids, or just trying to like get kids logged in to start the the meeting, I was always running over and maybe like missing, like we didn't finish a lesson. And so one of the things that I started doing is like essentially like a feedback loop where I would post like an online countdown timer and set it for like 10 minutes. Because if I set a timer on my phone and we're in person, my phone would go off and the kids are still just kind of daydreaming, not really getting into it. But if I post that like countdown timer, like you have 10 minutes, let's do this part in 10 minutes. They see the time going down and they get to work. And essentially, yeah, it's a feedback loop. So like letting them see in real time, like, oh, I have this much time, I better get to work. That allowed me to basically get through the full lessons in the exact time. And that was like the best thing that I came up with to do it, because yeah.
I love that. That's a good practical tip too, to keep the inquiry moving along. That's awesome.
Yeah, and keep it moving along, because it would just drag sometimes, and then kids would lose interest. So hit those time things, and it ran so much smoother once I did that.
That's great. Awesome. Kelly, do you have any tips?
I do. And I know that switching curriculums, let alone shifting your whole mindset of thinking of what learning looks like, is scary enough. But my tip to any teachers that would be looking to start the inquiry process with inquiry journeys is to enjoy your own learning process. Grow as a teacher and put yourself outside your comfort zone so that your students can really excel and that their strengths can really shine through. And it takes time, but learn to let your students take charge of their learning. And like I said before, is let their interests and their curiosities be that driving force. Because when they are at the center of it, that's when they're most engaged. And when they're most engaged, that's when they're learning the most and get the most out of it. And then that in turn is the best benefit for a teacher.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I don't know about you, Sarah, but I feel like this is the best part of our job, is talking with you all and hearing the amazing things happening with your classes, especially this year that's been so challenging. Sarah, do you have anything to add or any other questions?
Well, I would just add that this is the best part of my job. This is a big part of my job, is I get to talk to people at schools and districts, teachers, coaches. I know we have a lot of coaches on this call. I get to do it, but nothing's as inspiring as hearing from other teachers and seeing the work of other students. And so I'm just really grateful you three took the time and the courage to come and share your work, because I know that that's much more inspiring to other teachers than us sharing it out on your behalf. And so I would just, put a call out to all the teachers who are watching to share your work and share your students' work, because I really think the more we see each other do it, the more, as Kelly, you said it, the more we take that risk in letting kids do this work. We trust them the way you did, Alicia, to rise to like the sky's the limit. The more we see other teachers doing this, the more we're inspired to do it ourselves. And it's great for all the kids out there. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate how involved Inquire Ed is with teachers, and to be able to communicate and troubleshoot and have that support from the people providing the curriculum, I think is huge. And I've really enjoyed that piece of it, is to that openness to work with teachers and receive that feedback. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you all so much. And we'll be sending out the recording in the next couple of days. Panelists, teachers, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you all again next time. Thank you.